lot of positive energy, like unbelievable amount. Like the air was actually thick. It was, I cannot describe it, except it literally, you could feel, if you were to put your hand through the air like that, it was almost like you were putting your hand through a I don't know, like a smoke, like a, I can't describe it. I really can't describe it. I almost want to say some kind of like substance that is airy, but not air, because it's thicker. But anyways, you could literally physically feel it, is my point. So I walk in and I'm like, whoa, Dan, your mom's place is just pulsing with love right now, man. Like, this is a whole other level. And he goes, yeah, it feels pretty good. And I'm like, no, this is like intense. Now, I look in the kitchen, which is here. I made a little design for you guys, some of my illustrations, my masterful illustrations here. That's a joke, by the way. So here's the kitchen. Here's Mr. L's wife. Here is Dan's mom, and me and him are standing right here in the doorway. And I noticed, I'm just kind of being overwhelmed by the sensation that I'm having. And all of a sudden, the toilet flushes in the bathroom here. And I'm thinking, well, there's only one person missing, and that's Mr. L. So I assumed it was him that was in the restroom. Now, the moment he comes around the corner from the hallway where the restroom is, a wave hits me. And some of you are thinking it's a number 2 wave. No, he didn't do number 2, I don't think. I think he did number 1. It was a wave of that love. It was more of that immense love feeling. And it literally, it was almost like 3 or 4 feet in front of him. As he came around the corner, it just, boom, it hits you. And when I say it's an immense amount of love, it's a very physical, very energy, if you will, kind of sensation of love. It's not the kind of love like when your fiance or wife is walking down the aisle and you have that feeling like, I'm in love, and it's emotional. This almost really doesn't have any emotion to it. It's almost more energy. Although it does cause emotion, which is complete elation or joy or happiness. Once you feel it, it's just like perma-smile is what I call it. Just permanent smile stuck on your face. You don't even know you're doing it. That was exactly what was happening. I did not know I had this smile on my face. No idea. So Mr. L comes around the corner. Let's get to the point, right? Mr. L comes around the corner, and he gives, Dan a hug, and I'm thinking to myself, because I had read the Carlos Castaneda books, which once again, I'm only pointing out, the Carlos Castaneda books are kind of the Bible to a modern Toltec shaman practitioner, in the sense that Carlos Castaneda was a social anthropologist who went down to Mexico to meet with a gentleman by the name of Don Juan. Not the lover, but another guy. So Don Juan did these teachings with him and took him through the entire process of becoming a Nagual. And in the end, Carlos Castaneda becomes a Nagual himself. So I had read most of those books. I think out of the 12 or 11, I was up to 9 by the time I was at this moment of experiencing Mr. L. So I had already known what was coming. That's very important for you to understand. Dan had read the books as well, but for some reason I was far more excited and joyful about what I believe was about to go down. Dan didn't seem too excited or joyful about it. And we'll get to that. So he gives Dan a hug, and he turns to me and he's about to give me a hug. And I was only hoping that he was going to do what is called move my assemblage point. Now, the best way I can describe this is imagine a tripod and a camera sitting on the tripod. Obviously, the camera's facing that way. If you move the camera like this, up and down, you're moving its perspective, its point of view. In us, between our shoulder blades, if you were to imagine that the ball of light that is in the center of your energy field, your energy egg, sits between your shoulder blades in the center of your body. This energy ball would be what's called your assemblage point. Okay, it is the perspective. It is your view of how you perceive the reality you are in. When a shaman hugs you, a Nagual specifically, not a Tanal, a shaman hugs you, they can move your assemblage point to another location to give you another perspective. Does this make sense? When he went to hug me, it was my hope that that was exactly what he was going to do. And he did. So as he hugged me, I didn't feel any different, but I had already been overwhelmed by this love sensation, so I really couldn't feel anything. My skin was literally numb. I don't know, you had too much to drink numb, like scotch. You know how scotch kind of makes your face numb? Anyways, it does that to me. It's that kind of numb. So, hey, you could say I was drunk with love. But yeah, so he hugs me and he says, "Nathan, so nice to meet you." And Dan says Nathan has been having these issues, and he describes them in very brief. When he was telling Mr. L about this, it wasn't like, you know, he was saying Nate says. You know, he was kind of vouching for me. And Dan had also experienced his own demons, if you will, and we'll get to that as well in this video. But Mr. L looks at me and he's like, "No problem." And that's how he talks, what I call the guru talk. Very, "Hello, welcome, I'm a guru." You know, that kind of thing? It was very much like that. You know, little Indian man with strong spiritual power, that whole deal. It's a pretty cool experience, not gonna lie. So he invites me and Dan to sit down. Now this is where we sit down. Dan sits in a recliner here, I sit in a rocking chair here, and Mr. L sits on these blankets that are folded up that we used for meditation. So Mr. L, sits on the ground. Now I felt very awkward about the fact that I was sitting higher than him. I felt it was almost kind of rude of me, but he insisted on sitting on the ground while allowing us to be in the chairs. And I felt that that was very humble action for him to do. Now he looks at Dan and he begins to talk to Dan, and Dan kind of is like, yeah, you know, we're here for Nathan. Why don't you talk to Nathan? Like, we're more here for him. He needs help. I thought Dan was just being really helpful because I thought maybe he knew that Mr. L would spend most of his time on Dan. Mr. L then turns to me. Mr. L looks at me and he says, "Nathan, tell me about what's going on." So I give him this brief background, which you guys have already heard, so I'm not going to repeat it. And I give him it takes me like 5-10 minutes to tell him what I'm experiencing. And he says, "Okay, no problem." He says, "Nathan, tell me, what are you?" And I'm like, "I'm a human being." And he goes, "But what are you really? What are you made of?" And I'm like, "Energy." And he says, "What is energy?" And I'm like, "Love." And he's like, "Yes, so you're made of?" And I'm like, "I'm made of love." And he goes, "Exactly." And he says, "And what do these things want from you? What are they feeding off of you?" And I said, "They're feeding off my fear. They want my fear from me." And he says, "Exactly." He says, "But are you fear?" And I said, "No, I'm not fear. Fear is something I make up in my mind. It is something I created in my mind. It's an ethereal kind of energy that I produce." And he says, "Exactly." He says, "So all you have to do is tell them the truth. Tell them that the only thing that you have to give them is love. And then love them. Give them love. And it will starve them. It will suffocate them. They will not be able to eat it because they live off of fear. And the moment you tell them the truth, that you are love and that you love them, they will go away." And the moment he said the words, "and they'll go away," I felt literally it seemed like the weight of the world lifting off my shoulders. It was the same weight that dropped me to my knees when I was in that church when I was 4 years old. It was this devastated, absolute horrific fear had left me. I was no longer scared of anything. I was no longer scared of death. I was no longer scared of demons or ghosts or demonic or angels or nothing. I wasn't scared of anything. And I knew right then and there that I had just taken back my personal power, my personal first ring of power. I just received all that energy back. I closed the door on fear. I closed the door on everything coming at me and trying to steal my joy from me. I closed the door on it, and immediately I was made whole from this truth, from this knowing that I am love, that my fear is a false production of my human part. And the moment I realized that, they went away. My issues stopped. Now, I had a few lingering residues that I still had to deal with, and I will get into that in other videos. But the Hat Man, gone. The crinkly paper in my sound in my bedroom stopped. It doesn't mean that it wasn't there, but it wasn't happening while I was around. the energy of my bedroom became positive again. It was refilled with love again. It wasn't full of this mixed spirituality. I took possession of my life in every single way, and I claimed love over all of it. I gave love over all parts of it. Now, I was still a teenage boy. I was still a brat. I was still thought I knew everything in the world, so I was still an arrogant jerk. But my spiritual experiences were no longer controlled by fear. Now I was able to control my spiritual experiences with love. I was able to logically control the floodgates. It was no longer completely open and the waters were running through. Now I decided what came through and what didn't. All from this single talk that he had, and it took about as long as I just told it to you. Now once he was done, he could see that I was changed. He could see that I had got it, the light bulb went on, and I was now different. He then turned to Dan, and that was a different story altogether. Dan's experience didn't go as well as mine did. Mr. L turns to Dan and he says, "Daniel, let's talk about you." And Dan's like, okay. And he's like, "Tell me about the dragon." Dan's more like, he's gripping the living crud out of the recliner chair that he's in. He's like gripping it with his hands, like really intense. And he's kind of like doing one of these numbers, like, "How do you know about the dragon?" And he's like really freaking out. And Mr. L goes, "Tell me, Daniel, what does the dragon want from you? What is the dragon?" And Dan's like, he starts to shake. He's just like, fear. Dragon is made of fear. And he's like, "Right. And how do you kill the dragon, Daniel? Do you want to kill the dragon?" He's like, Yes, I want to kill the dragon." He's like, "How do you get rid of the dragon, Daniel?" And Dan's just like, I don't know. Cut its head off, I don't know. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, just stab it in the heart. Stab the thing in the heart, because if you stab something in the heart, it dies. I don't know why, that's just what I was thinking. So Dan's like, "Chop the head off." And I'm like, yeah, it's a pretty good opportunity. I would say chop the head off. But Mr. L goes, "What happens when you chop the head off, Daniel?" And Dan's just like, "Another one grows back." And Mr. L goes, "Does another one grow back, or do 2 more grow back?" And Dan's like, "2 more. And he's like totally shaking at this time. And I'm not making fun of Dan, by the way, guys. It is important to understand too that I'm seeing my 6'2" best martial artist guy I've ever seen in my life, who's scared of nothing, who wants to be a Navy SEAL. I mean, if I was in war, this is the guy I would want next to me. And he is like not scared of anything. And this man is talking about this dragon, which only I knew about Dan's dragon. My Hat Man was Dan's dragon. So it was this thing that was always kind of like there lurking around him. He'd look down the hallway and he'd see like a red dragon tail whip around the corner. Like it was those kind of things that really haunted Dan. I don't believe he told anybody about it. He didn't. He at least didn't tell Mr. L, because the first thing he said was, "How do you know about the dragon?" Right? So this also let me know that Mr. L was able to see Dan's egg. He was able to see into Dan's spiritual realm, if you will. And I guess Dan just didn't want to go there. He didn't want to face his demon at this time of his life, let's just say. And Mr. L kind of seemed intent on revealing it to him or showing it to him. So Mr. L did another thing like the moving of the assemblage point, right? Where he gives you a hug and they use their energy and they move your assemblage point. Mr. L did another thing that Naguals do, which is he said, "Look at my left eye." The left eye, like I mentioned before, the right side is Tanal, the left side is Nagual, so the left eye is the window, if you will, into the Nagual. So when he says, "Look at my left eye," I'm sitting there going like this. Yes! Because I know what's coming. I know that Mr. L is about to show Dan the Nagual. My hope is that I'm going to be able to see it too. I'm not looking directly at Mr. L. I'm looking at him probably about that much of a profile. Maybe like that. You know, and he's looking at Dan like that. So I can see his left eye, maybe a little bit of his right eye, but most of it is like, you know, everything is focused towards Dan. But I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to see this Nagual thing too. So, here we go. He says, "Look at my left eye," and Dan's like, "Okay." Now Dan read the Carlos Castaneda book, so he knew what was coming as well. The moment after this, Mr. L starts saying, "I got you, Daniel. I got you. I got you. It's okay. I love you, Daniel." I love you. And then he kind of gets quiet. And the next thing I know is that there is this window, this balcony that leads outside right here. Through this balcony, the shades are mostly shut, but they're a little bit open, and you can see kind of sunlight coming through. All of a sudden, the light outside becomes super bright white, like it whitewashes everything to where you can't even see. And it doesn't hurt to look at. Then all of a sudden, the white kind of whitewashes out and kind of almost fades everything away. As this is going down, Mr. L begins to physically change. Like how you see your hand, if you put your hand up in front of you right now, how you see your hand, that physical shape, the physical way that you know that reality, that began to change. His physical form began to change. It wasn't like a thing that I saw in my mind's eye. The first thing he changed into was he became this like Indian, if you will, with kind of like some form of headgear on, some form of headdress on that had feathers in it. I'm not going to say it was a headdress like you see in the old kind of Western movies where the guy has just that chain of feathers going down his back. It wasn't like that because I saw most of it was high set. But he had this kind of feather headdress on. After that, he turned into an eagle. Yeah, the man turned in to a half-naked Indian, then he turned into an eagle. And the only thing that stayed the same through this morphing was his left eye. Everything else about him changed, but his left eye stayed the same. Now, as this morphing began, so he would be what, you know, throughout ancient times, people have talked about this mythology of shapeshifters. Well, Naguals also are shapeshifters. Maybe not all of them, but I think most of them are, because they have to be masters of both stalking this world and they have to be masters of dreaming, and together that should give them the ability to shapeshift. But my point is that he was shapeshifting. Meanwhile, at the exact same time that this is going down, everything that was kind of lit up really, really white bright had completely begun to fizzle away and become black nothingness. So Dan's mom and Mr. L's wife are in the kitchen. Not anymore. There was no kitchen. Now the walls began to just basically vanish. The floor began to vanish. There was no house, there was no kitchen, there was nothing. There only was black void eventually. It got to a point where we were sitting in what looked like outer space. But no stars, no planets, no light. There was no light source whatsoever. But the lighting on us was the same as it was when the world was still intact. Let's say that. So exactly what everything looked like on us, the chairs and us, were the same, but the blackness of where the walls and the world were gone. It was just void. Mr. L was sitting on the blankets in void. And this is crazy. So I'm sitting there just right? Like just completely elated and so stoked about what I'm seeing. Dan's not so excited about what he's seeing. Dan's sitting there going, oh my god, like freaking out, shaking like crazy. I mean, I thought he was gonna pop his top. I mean, I really, really did. And he's just like, oh, I'm like, and so all of a sudden now I'm thinking to myself, when did I have LSD and when did I have peyote or mushrooms? Like, I'm trying to think to myself, when did I digest a hallucinogen? Because this is the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. But I mean, I knew it was coming, but to see it is a whole other ballgame, obviously. I mean, you can hear me talk about it, and even if you believe me, well, good for you. I wouldn't believe me. I'll tell you that right now. If I was sitting on that side of the screen and I was listening to a guy tell this story, I probably wouldn't believe him, even though I did believe Carlos Castaneda's books. A YouTube video, some guy talking about this, I don't think I believe him. So if you believe me, God bless you. But, because I am telling the truth. But, as he began to morph, I'm thinking, I must have been slipped something. And I'm starting to think a role play coming into the house. And there was no time where I drank anything. There was no time where I ate anything. Like I said, I walked in, waved hello to Dan's mom and Mr. L's wife. The toilet flushed, Mr. L came out, hugged Dan, hugged me, and then we sat down. I didn't get sprayed with any spray bottles like sometimes people spray people with LSD at like raves and stuff like that. Like nobody sprayed me with anything, nobody put any water on me or nothing like that. So I cannot think about, I didn't get slipped anything is what I'm trying to tell you. I have been sent to a hypnotist to try to deal with my issues as a kid, and I could never be hypnotized. So I know also that I was not hypnotized. So I knew, I'm like, did I get hypnotized this time? Point is I was questioning what the heck I was seeing, rightfully so. All of a sudden, he went from the eagle and became a wolf. And then from the wolf, you know how wolves have that kind of white smoky-ish color to them? Well, that white kind of took over his form and he morphed into something else. I don't know if I want to say it was a dragon. I couldn't really tell what it was because it was in between two different morphs. So it was only like he went from one and then into another. I have no idea if that makes any sense to you. But he went from wolf into something else. I couldn't totally point out what the heck it was, into this final thing which I call the mold. So, not mold like that grows on your wall, you'll understand in a second. So, as this is going down, he after he changes from the wolf into this other thing, whatever he changed into that I couldn't tell what it was, Dan lost it. I mean, he got really upset at this point. And then all of a sudden when Mr. L became what I would call the mold or the mannequin. So, if you've ever seen those mannequins that like fashion designers use, where they don't have faces, they don't have eyes, they don't have eyebrows, they don't even really have a nose. It's just kind of like the head is very just human, a shape, like an egg-shaped head, and there's maybe like a little bump for a nose, and then this is all flat, and then there's a chin. So he looked like that, right? It was just this porcelain or metallic-looking human mold shape, and it was this smoky white kind of color. And the next thing I know, the face popped off, like 4 or 5 inches popped off of like the head. So it almost looked like it became a mask and it just popped off. When it popped off, Dan did a front ball kick at Mr. L. Just whoa, threw a front ball kick. If you don't know what it is, it's like if this is the bottom of your foot, you take the ball of your toes and you kick somebody, with that part. So Dan just goes, bah! And he kicked so hard, it sounded like he broke the recliner. Like the whole recliner was like, chunk, and he just like, Kah! And I was just like, oh! And he was so far away, he didn't hit Mr. L. But if Mr. L was close enough, he probably would have lost his head. Like I said, Dan was one of the most killer martial artists I've ever seen in real life. So if you got kicked by him at full force like this thing definitely was, it would have been bad. So Dan front ball kicks right as the face was coming at, it looked like coming at him, which is why I believe he front ball kicked, as a knee-jerk martial arts reaction would do, is when something comes at them, they, can react. Well, that was when I realized me and Dan were seeing the same thing. I was not hallucinating. Whatever it was we were seeing, we were both seeing it.